Our dentures have now come back from the doctor's office with patient approval. It's time to get started on processing. We're going to disarticulate our models and invest them in plaster, wash them out, and pack them in acrylic. Let's get started. The first thing we have to do today is remove the model from the mounting. We're going to do this by placing a large lab knife in between the plaster and the stone model and strike it with a hammer to separate them. Just a little tap will separate the model and the mounting. Going to do the lower. Be gentle, you don't want to break the model, and that is very possible. That's why we always work with duplicate models. Make sure we have a spare in case it's needed. Let's place the setup back on the models and check the fit inside of our curing flask. The lower looks pretty good. The upper is a little bit tall. We're going to have to shorten the profile on that model and maybe bring it in a little bit better so we can fit it in the flask. You want the edges of the wax to be about level with the edge of the flask. The models have now been trimmed to fit inside the flask. We've taken hot wax and run it along the edges to seal it to the model. Have some plaster mixed up. We want to fill the flask. Now we're going to push our dentures into the plaster to a point where they're level and centered. Okay, this is very important. You must make sure that you have a very smooth mounting, no undercuts. If you have undercuts when you do this, you're going to lock your flasks together when you pour your second amount. We're just going to take our plaster knife and clean up the edges. If you feel there's an area that might catch, just add a little more plaster and fill that in. Want that very smooth. Same with our lower. And the spatula works very well at making a nice smooth surface with the roundness here. It's the perfect tool for investing. On the lower, we're going to take a little bit, push it inside. I see there's a little bit of an undercut on each side of the lingual of that denture, so we're going to take that plaster and fill that right in so we don't have a locking point. Okay. Next, again, I'm going to take some water, as we always want to smooth our plaster out. We want to make sure that the flask is completely clean, all the edges, so that we don't hold the flask open in an irregular fashion, creating false heights. Just take your finger and smooth it around in there. Smooth as can be. All right, we're going to let that set up just a little bit, and once it gets more firm, we'll run it under water and clean any excess plaster off of our setups. Okay, now that our plaster has set up, we're ready to add on our second layer. But first we must paint separator on our plaster base. This is so the two models don't stick together when we put the flasks in position. And they used to have technicians burnish tin foil on top of the models to separate the plaster and stone. It was laborious, and that's why the other name for this separator is tinfoil substitute. Now that we've painted them thoroughly, we're going to put the flasks together. You can see the lower is higher in the back. Generally, you have more depth in the back of a lower denture. The upper is on a flat base. And these are numbered so they match and line up. So we want to put them together, make sure it's nice and tight. Okay? And we have a mixture of half plaster, half stone. You don't want it extremely strong because it could break the teeth when we go to open these up. You can see the height here is a good checkpoint too. Make sure your teeth are not higher than the edge of your flask or you're going to have to start over. Okay, I like to whip mix these. There's no vacuum, but it gives you a nice, smooth, perfect mix. You want to mix for about 30 to 60 seconds. You can feel the consistency in the bowl. Okay. Remove that lid. Turn on our vibrator. And what we want to do is have that stone come up from the bottom around the teeth. If you wash it over the teeth, you're going to lock little air bubbles around the teeth, which you'll have to finish off later in acrylic. And that's very time consuming. All right, now we just want to top off our flask. Just going to put the remaining stone inside of here, and you want it to be an overflow of stone. Make sure the teeth are fully covered. Okay. Then we're going to take the tops, the lids, press them in position, and you want that excess to come out and lock these holes in so the flask doesn't come apart when we're washing it out. If you don't have enough and it's just coming to the edge, you do want to take a little bit more and tap it in that hole to get a locking point. Now we've invested the cases and we're going to heat our water and separate these two halves and wash away the wax. Our flasks have cured and it's time to wash away the wax. We're going to place them in a hot water bath around 150 degrees for 3 minutes. This will soften the wax. When we're done with this, we're going to put it under the rinsing station and completely wash the wax away. After that, we'll place it under clean, fresh, hot water to get any chemicals off the teeth. From that point, we're ready to pack the cases. Let's get started. We're placing the flask in the bath, and we're using heat-resistant gloves. The water is very hot and will scald your skin. Again, we're going to wait for about 3 minutes. Okay, our time is up. It's time to open the flasks. We'll take one out at a time. We're gently pulling away the wax. Some teeth might come loose. We'll rinse them later. There's boil out solution in here that'll wash away any leftover wax. If a tooth remains in the wax space, simply remove it, place it inside of a strainer, and rinse the wax away. And again, you're going to rinse that individual tooth in clean fresh water. Here's what the flask looks like with the wax removed. Using the same separator we used to coat the models earlier, we're going to paint the models again to stop the acrylic from bonding to the stone and plaster. Paint it thoroughly. I like to do it when it's a little warm first to have it soak into the stone, and then we'll do a second coat before we process and pack the acrylic. Paint the flask as well, because the acrylic will stick to the edges. It may pool a little bit, but it'll dry. Here it's important to get in between all the teeth. Get the edges first. You don't want to get the separator on the backs of the teeth. That'll keep it from bonding to the acrylic. So we're going to take a fan brush and work our way gently in between all the teeth. Make sure it's thoroughly painted or the stone will stick to the acrylic. If you have any voids, you can fill that in with a little extra plaster. A void would be any kind of a hole or pit where you might have had an air bubble when you did the investment the first time. Okay, we'll do this a second time, and then we'll be ready to pack the cases. It's time to mix our acrylic. Acrylics generally use a 3-to-1 ratio, 3 powder to 1 liquid, but please check your directions on all acrylics and liquids you may purchase for packing acrylic. I always put the liquid in first. We have 2 units, so we're going to measure 2 units of liquid. And I find it simple to get an old porcelain coffee cup to mix. No need to spend a lot of money on getting an expensive mixing jar. Anything porcelain is going to keep the acrylic from sticking inside the jar. You just want to mix this thoroughly. Make sure there's no dry spots. We're going to cover that with a piece of plastic, separating paper, to keep the monomers in there, and it'll be ready to pack shortly. Our acrylic has set up to the proper consistency. We're going to remove it from the jar. You want to use barrier cream on your hands. That keeps the monomer from being absorbed into your skin, causes irritations. Some people are allergic. It's difficult to use gloves when using this material because it will get tacky and stick to the glove, so barrier cream keeps it from bonding to my fingers. Nice doughy consistency. And we're just going to put that, push it all around the teeth into the flask. You want to have it mounded over a little bit. You don't want to come up short because you'll underpack and have a porous case. Okay, I've used 3 pieces of separating paper. This is going to remind me how many packs I've gone to, and once we go down to the final paper, you're going to see very few wrinkles in the acrylic. We're going to first pack at 1,000 pounds of pressure, 2,500 pounds of pressure, and then at 3,500 pounds of pressure. You can wrinkle the papers up a little bit, break up the fibers. And place them over the acrylic side. Put the top on and place it into the flask press. Again, the first pressure is 1,000 pounds. We have a dial caliper up here which tells us the amount of pressure we're putting onto the flask. Again, do the same for the other case. Sometimes when you're packing 12 cases at a time, you may forget how many packs you have on a case, and that's why I use the 3 papers as a reminder. Again, 1,000 pounds of pressure. You don't want to put too much pressure on in the beginning. It may dislodge teeth or put too much stress on the ridge if you have a thin ridge on a model. So you gently want to build up as you go. We're going to toss away 1 paper. And as you can see, the separator is allowing us to remove the acrylic from the flask. Notice the wrinkles. They'll go away the more we pack. This is ready for our second pack now at 2,500 pounds. Make sure there's no stone or debris inside your acrylic. The more you pack, it'll get forced deeper inside and you might show it on the outside of the denture. Again, 2,500 pounds. Now with the second pack, we're getting a little bit more detail, a little less wrinkling, and a little less excess coming off on our acrylic. This is the final pack. We have 1 sheet left. What I'll do is I will take some clean acrylic and just add that in. I would have liked a little bit more flash on there. So that tells me the case might be slightly underpacked, so I'll just add a little bit more of the clean acrylic we removed inside for our final pack. This is at 3,500 pounds. We've finished our packing process, and you can see we have a lot of nice detail here. Everything matches the opposing model. Any little bit of extra flash that's on there, just take your fingernail, remove anything that you see that might be excess that you'd have to trim off and finish later. What we're going to do now is put a stretchy sheet of paper. It's a little bit different than the one we use to pack. I'm going to heat this in warm water with my hands, stretch it out very thin, and it's going to create a nice barrier in here which will give us a nice finish inside the denture. This is our stretched piece of plastic, very thin, creates a nice saliva barrier. This will go inside of our flask, to be clamped and cured. We're going to do the same to the upper. clamp these in the vise. Position them so they're centered. And just with good hand pressure, completely close it down. There is a spring in here, so that's going to create the additional pressure you need. Nice and tight. Take the stretchy paper with your hands, trim it off the edge so it doesn't end up in your curing unit. And now we're ready to put this into the curing unit to get our hard acrylic. Follow your acrylic curing times. We're going to go 3 hours at boil, and then it's going to cure overnight in the hot water. The unit will turn off by itself. Make sure it's completely covered with water, and there you are. We're ready to open these the next day and have our cured denture product.